Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. We wiped the squad.
Good kill, friend.
Hey, what's up and welcome to Game Positive. With next gen fast approaching, a lot of us who are used to playing games on consoles are very excited and ready to start experiencing games at a much higher fidelity and much higher frame rates. But a lot of us, our setups, may not be ready to accommodate that just yet. I know mine wasn't, and that's why I wanted to make this video. I'm going to talk to you about everything I learned about display technology and hopefully make the process of getting ready for 120 FPS gaming that much easier for you. Off the top, I just want to clarify a few things. One, a lot of this is my subjective opinion, but it's based off of research and testing I've done over the last few months. And two, for a lot of people, spending 500 US, 600 Canadian on a next-gen console is a lot of money, and going out and buying a high-end TV or monitor to go right alongside that expense is just not an option for a lot of us. And that's why this video is going to be more focused on the best budget option, the best way that you can get 120 FPS gaming without breaking the bank. Now, before we get into what I ultimately chose as a monitor, I just want to take a few minutes to go over some of the common things you'll see on a monitor spec sheet, what they mean, so that it's a little bit easier for you to kind of follow along with what I'm saying. And also, if you wanted to go and do your own research and compare your own different sets of monitors, maybe those spec sheets will be a little bit easier to read and a little bit easier to compare. So first up, there's the contrast ratio, and what that essentially means is the difference between the darkest black and the brightest white that the display can kind of display. You see that on the spec sheet a lot as like a 1000 to 1, 10,000 to 1, like that's the type of figure you would see. And for me, this is really important because one of my biggest pet peeves with any display is the black uniformity. And what that means is the monitor's ability to display the color black while the backlight is on. Typically, like if you're watching a movie in like a cinematic aspect ratio where you have like the black bars on the top and bottom, if the scene itself is also really dark, sometimes you'll see some backlight bleeding, like some white or blue light kind of bleeding through those black bars, which can be distracting. So having a high contrast ratio helps alleviate that, although it's very hard to just flat out stop that from happening without some additional features that I can talk a little bit more about later. Next up is viewing angles. Viewing angles is the degradation of picture quality while viewing the screen at an angle. If you move your head to the left or right, or like look at it at a slightly different angle, a lot of times the color will become washed out and stuff like that. So viewing angles just is a way for reviewers to kind of measure how bad that is. Refresh rate we kind of talked about a little bit, and that's how fast a monitor can refresh the image on the screen. It's typically measured in hertz. Next up is response time. Response time is sometimes confused with refresh rate, but response time is typically measured in milliseconds, and what it means is it's how long it takes for the colors to update on the screen. It's typically measured in how fast it can go from gray to gray, like across the color spectrum from gray to gray. Lower response times, or I guess technically higher response times, could lead to ghosting or like blurry kind of smudgy images while objects move across the screen. And that's just because the colors can't update as fast as the objects and the screen is refreshing. Next up is color accuracy. This was confusing to me at first because like I'm not like an art major or like a graphic designer or anything like that. But technically what it is, it's the ability for the monitor to kind of display the exact tones and shades that is being sent to it by its video signal. So like if the game console or computer or whatever you have plugged into your monitor is sending it an image of a man wearing a red shirt, it's up to the monitor to be able to display that exact red that the signal is sending it. A lot of times, if you don't have very accurate colors, that red shirt may become more like orange red or like yellowy red. It's basically just not able to display the colors in the exact way that the artist or whoever is creating the content envisioned. Next up is HDR. This one stands for high dynamic range. It basically allows the display to display vastly more colors, which results in a significantly more vibrant image. This is typically achieved through having a lot more brightness, because obviously all color comes from light, and the more brightness, the more light you have, a lot of times the more color you can reproduce. That's kind of a really basic way to explain it. There's a lot more happening behind the scenes, but essentially what HDR means is you can display more colors, which is typically a good thing. Next up, which is kind of a big one, and it is kind of the main difference between shopping for a TV and shopping for a monitor. It's the type of panel that the monitor is. So there's three main types of panels that you'll be looking at when you're shopping for a monitor, and I just want to take a minute to kind of explain that here a little bit. So first, there's IPS, which stands for in-plane switching. IPS panels are known for having really good viewing angles, really awesome and accurate colors. They're very favored by graphic designers because of their color accuracy. They have really good contrast, but not the best contrast. And in typical scenarios, they actually have a more limited response time and refresh rate compared to the next monitor that we're going to talk about, TN panels. IPS typically are more expensive than TN as well, although all panels range from like budget to mid to high tier, so you can always see different types of panels that are more or less expensive than each other. But in general, IPS panels are typically more expensive than TN panels, which let's go right ahead, honestly, and talk about TN. So TN stands for Twisted Pneumatic. It's kind of the exact opposite of IPS. TN panels are known to have like pretty poor viewing angles and pretty washed out colors in comparison to IPS, but their response times are on average the best of all monitors, and the same thing with their refresh rates. Now, their refresh rates aren't necessarily better, it's just you can get higher refresh rates for a lower price typically with TN panels. And that leads me to the last point, which is TN panels are generally cheaper than the other panel types. So typically, you'll see the lower end panels be TN, like a lower end 1080p 144 hertz monitor will typically be TN if it's a lower price. However, there are very expensive TN panels as well that go well beyond 144 hertz. I've seen 240 hertz, I've seen 360 hertz, which is kind of insane. But yeah, that's TN panels. And then lastly, there's VA panels, which is stands for vertical alignment, which is kind of the middle ground between the first two we talked about. They have significantly better colors versus a TN panel, but they are behind IPS in terms of their color accuracy. They have a lot better viewing angles than TN, but they do still have images that degrade at sharper angles. They're not as good as IPS in that regard. Their response times and refresh rates are often better than IPS, but they definitely lag behind TN, which is always the fastest in terms of its response times. And but VA panels, they do have the best contrast ratios, which, like I talked about earlier, is really important to me because of that pet peeve I have with black uniformity, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. The way I look at it is the reason why I'm buying this monitor in the first place, right, is because I wanted to get something that was capable of running a game on a Series X or PS5 at 120 FPS. And then I started to look at the games that actually were going to run at 120 FPS, and those are games like Rainbow Six Siege, Halo MCC multiplayer, Gears multiplayer, potentially stuff like Apex Legends, Halo Infinite down the road. Basically a lot of PvP games, and like PvP games are definitely known for having dynamic resolutions with steady frame rates. Like the frame rate is the king, and the actual like visual fidelity is not something that is at the top of the focus for those games. So I thought to myself, well, I can maybe just try and find like the best budget 1440p 140 hertz monitor and use that to play multiplayer games, and then I can play anything that's meant to be a visual showpiece. I can play that on my TV. Like at the end of the day, I'm still going to have the TV that I already have. So with this in mind, I started scouring Amazon, and I eventually landed on this monitor, the AOC 27G2, which is quite fantastic. I had never heard of the brand AOC before, but after doing some research, I found out that they actually have been around for over 80 years. And as a brand, they're extremely popular in Europe and Asia and Australia and New Zealand. They just have not had much of a presence in North America until recently. Looking through the spec sheet on the website, I was pretty skeptical for the price and the specs. Like, it didn't really line up with what I was used to seeing. It felt like it was too good to be true almost. Like I was getting a lot more than what I was spending. The monitor at regular price and what I paid was $349.99 Canadian. I have seen the G1 version of this monitor, which for all intents and purposes is actually the same monitor. It just slightly less curved. The G1 has a 1800R curve and the G2 has a 1500R curve. The base of the stand is also slightly different color on the G2, but as far as I know, that's the only difference. I couldn't, with all the reviews I've read and the videos I've watched, that seems to be the only difference. And the G1 I've actually seen on the American Amazon for as low as $249.99 USD, which is a steal because this monitor, guys, this monitor is fantastic for the price. It is so good for what you're paying. Let's take a quick look at the spec sheet here. So right off the bat, it's 1440p, so you get 2560 by 1440 resolution. It is a 144 hertz refresh rate panel. It does have two HDMI 2.0 ports, which means you'll be able to plug your Series X or PS5 into the monitor and get 1440p at 120 FPS. It also has a display port so that you can plug in a computer to it as well. Obviously, you can also plug a computer in via HDMI. It has a 1 millisecond response time, which is going to give you really good motion, which I can confirm it does. And surprisingly for the price, it has really good ergonomics. It has a height adjust and a tilt adjust, which is really important because when you are gaming, you really want your face to kind of be exactly center with the monitor. My old monitor did have height adjust, but it was didn't travel very far up and down, so I often had to put a box underneath it to make it kind of at head level, which was a little annoying. But the ergonomics are really good, and it's a VA panel, which I never really got into it when I was talking about the 3 different types of panels, but VA panels are 100% my personal favorite. I really hate how washed out the colors often look on TN panels, and IPS panels, they have this kind of weird glow to them where if you're looking at something that's more dark, or if you're viewing like a dark kind of piece of content, the glow, like all of the blacks start to look like a bluish gray color, and it's just very distracting for me. And it might not bother some people, but it really bothers me. I actually can't use an IPS panel for anything but content creation. And because I'm not a graphic designer, the extreme accurate colors I don't necessarily need. And often I prefer a little bit more of a oversaturated look because usually I'm playing video games, and video games are not often real people. It's like 3D artwork that, in my opinion, pops more when it's more saturated. So I really like the look of a VA panel. So basically, this really just checks every single box, and it's a fantastic monitor. Some things that really stood out to me when I was playing it, I tested it out with MCC on PC and Overwatch on PC, and I was playing both of those games at 144 FPS. And I didn't see very much at all in ghosting. The performance was exceptional. 1440p coming from a 1080p monitor, which is what I used to play on, is a significant upgrade in my opinion, especially at 27 inches, which is the size of this monitor. I forgot to mention that. At 27 inches, 1440p, just at this sweet spot where the pixel density is just like perfect for the screen size. And you just get really crisp images, really crisp textures, really crisp text. In terms of its color accuracy, I know that's not necessarily the strong suit of VA panels, but looking over at rtings.com, which by the way, rtings.com is definitely my favorite source for any type of TV or monitor reviews. They just go into like extreme detail, and they'll definitely have you purchasing with confidence with how detailed their reviews are. But if you take a look at this here, it's actually almost has full coverage of the sRGB color space, and it's not too far off with the Adobe color space either. It's definitely not recommended to use this for any professional design work, like you're not going to get the accuracy that you need, but for gaming I think it's actually really good. While watching content that is dark, you can still see some backlight bleed, which is not avoidable honestly at this price range. The only really real way that you can combat that backlight bleed, and I'll show some images here as well of what I'm talking about, is to have a local dimming, which is a feature that allows parts of the backlight to turn on and off at different times. So you may have like a row of LEDs on the top and bottom that will turn off when you're viewing content at a cinematic aspect ratio, so those black bars are perfectly black. But that type of feature is typically only found in TVs and in very high-end monitors, or of course you could have an OLED display which has infinite contrast, and that will give you perfect black uniformity. But again, that's extremely expensive. However, what I'm seeing here is actually better than some of the $600 monitors I've tested out from other, let's say more major brands that me and you have probably heard of before. So I was really impressed with what I've got here for black uniformity. Also, this monitor does support AMD FreeSync technology, which is used to kind of help iron out some stuttering and some latency that you may experience with higher frame rates. It's officially supported on the monitor. It's also supported on your Xbox One X, as well as the new Xbox Series S and Series X, and a lot of other TVs out there. Because it does support variable refresh rate, you also will have G-Sync support unofficially. If we take a look at the monitor, as you can see in the background, it does have kind of a gamer aesthetic with some red accents, but it's nothing like really over the top, and it is quite subtle when you see it in person. A lot of times people want their monitors to kind of blend in with their desk or their gaming area and not be so lavish, and this is kind of a nicer middle ground. Some things I didn't necessarily like though is the menu system. You do have a lot of granularity in terms of what you can adjust and control, but the way that you navigate through the menu on the monitor is with like 4 contextual buttons, which is not as intuitive as a joystick, which a lot of higher end monitors use, which I would have liked to see. I will say though that on the PC side of things, AOC does actually provide a desktop application that you can use to adjust all of the settings on the monitor just with your mouse, which is obviously like a significant improvement in terms of its usability. However, that doesn't necessarily help you if you're using this for a console, because you're still going to be stuck with those 4 buttons. And like, it is a cheap monitor, like let's not get carried away. So there are some kind of areas that you can see where they kind of save some money. One is like the overall build quality. It doesn't feel like it's going to break. It doesn't feel like super cheap, but it also doesn't feel like super hefty and super solid like some of the more expensive monitors that I purchased do. Another area where it clearly kind of cut cost is with the brightness. It has a max peak brightness of 250 nits, which isn't the brightest monitor that you'll see. However, if you're playing in a dark room, you definitely won't have any issues. I don't even have the brightness fully maxed out because I typically am playing at night and playing in a dark room. However, if you do plan on gaming during the day in a really well lit room, you may have some issues there. As well as there is a bit of a bezel along the sides and top of the monitor, which depending on what you're doing, that could be a little bit distracting. But again, for what you're paying for, the price you're paying, it is extremely acceptable in my opinion. It's just, honestly, it's just a very, very good monitor for the price, and it's going to really help you and really kind of get the most out of your Series X or PS5 when you're playing those multiplayer games at 120 FPS. I haven't got to play an Xbox game at that frame rate, but I've been playing MCC at 120 or 144 FPS very often, almost every day, and it's just night and day for me. It may not be as big of a jump going from 30 to 60 as it is from 60 to 120, but it is still a jump, and it's fantastic. I can't imagine not having 120 display. And yeah, so that's it, guys. That's kind of why I made this video. It went on a little bit longer than I thought it would, but I really wanted to get this option out there because I feel like a lot of people kind of feel like I think they're stuck with having to spend like $1,000 on or more on an OLED or a QLED TV, or get these super high-end gaming monitors. And this one's kind of hidden. Like I said, I never even heard of AOC before I bought this monitor. And honestly, for what you're paying and what you're getting, it's a steal. So highly recommend it. I really hope this video was able to help you with selecting a new display for your next-gen console. If you did find it useful and you did enjoy it, please remember to like and subscribe. I would really appreciate that. I have a ton of stuff planned coming with this next generation, and it's only a few days away. I really can't wait. But anyways, until next time, remember to have fun out there, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.